Okay, welcome. I am going to turn this over to Luis for the introduction. And Luis, you are up. I will make you the host for the time being.
Only for my time, which is going to be short.
Yeah, but let me just let me do this quickly. Sorry, everyone. Make host. Okay, Luis, you are up.
Okay, thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us in this important evening, in this important program with the wonderful speakers. Just to introduce myself, I'm Luis Fleischmann. I'm co-president of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research, along with Dr. Sussman. A little bit about the center. The idea of the center, when it was founded back in early 2019, was to gather local scholars and stakeholders who live in our area and in South Florida in general. There are great scholars from various universities in Florida who seek to give their opinions on a number of issues that affect our country and also the world in general. By the same token, we have in this area retired individuals who had a very successful career in government, academia, and other sectors. For instance, we have individuals such as Dr. Alvin Felsenberg, who is a former spokesperson for the 9/11 Commission. He supports our center. Professor Joel Levine, a former legal scholar and professor of philosophy at Case Western Reserve University, and local scholars such as Dr. Robert Ravil, a well-known nationally Middle Eastern expert, Dr. Joseph Olmert from South Carolina University, Dr. Sean Foreman, who is a speaker tonight also with us, is one of the speakers tonight, Dr. Kerry Healy, a former lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, and others. Now, initially, and I say initially because it still is, the focus of our center was on the state of global democracy and democracy in the United States. As you may know, contrary to what we expected after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, many countries in the world we expected them to move in the direction of liberal democracy, if you recall the famous article by Francis Fukuyama. However, the world actually surprised us and is moving in the direction of illiberal democracy and, I would say, illiberalism and autocratic rule. And of course, this has implications also on international affairs and national security. Think, for instance, of Venezuela, a country geographically close to the United States, where its citizens used to come to Miami and and do shopping for a weekend and then return to Venezuela. Venezuela now has turned not only into a dictatorship, but also into an anti-American dictatorship allied with Russia and Iran. Think about Hungary, a member of the European Union and NATO. Hungary is now closer to Russia, and of course also is conducting an illiberal rule. I'm sorry, I think I'm going to admit two more people.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
That's with the host, you get that
responsibility.
That is
correct. Think about Hungary, who now has become basically an illiberal government and basically an ally of Russia, while being still a member of NATO. Think about Turkey, that has displayed tremendous ambiguity and sometimes going against the interest of NATO, and also became what is called an illiberal regime, to say the least. So we have programs and published articles that have dealt with issues such as Latin America, the war in Ukraine, the situation in Europe, the situation in the Middle East, Afghanistan, China, and American foreign policy in general. On the domestic arena, we have had programs and articles on election reform, in election reform in a number of states. As you recall, we had a program on abortion that Dr. Sweet, who is also a speaker tonight, was the keynote speaker. We had programs on the challenges of democracy in the United States, the implication of the January 6 events, race relations and law enforcement in the United States, the immigration debate, legal and constitutional issues, issues related to the pandemics, the American dependency on China, the issue of cryptocurrencies, which, by the way, is becoming also very, very current now with the current crisis you probably heard, and the state of American higher education. Our next program is going to take place approximately in 2 weeks, and it will focus on the protest in Iran and its implications. Now, the problem is that to carry out all these programs, we need financial support. Our organization doesn't pay salaries, it's run by volunteers. We only pay the person who maintains our website and other expenses. Soon, we would like to start having our programs in person as they took place before the pandemic. We invite you to visit our website, www.palmbeachdemocracy.org. And if you allow me, I'll share with you the website. I'm sorry. Just one moment. Oh, here it is. 1 second. Let me try again.
It's usually easier to get to.
Yes, okay. This is the website. I invite you to visit the website. You can see that here you have all the articles, right? If you move, you can start. This is the last article that was published, but you can read all the articles. And if you scroll down, you can see also not only the articles, you continue to scroll down, and you are going to see also the programs that we have had, okay? They are all taped. Now, if you can see on the right here, where the arrow is, you have a button that says donate. We appreciate any donation. It doesn't matter what is the amount, but you know, if you donate, we will deeply appreciate it. You will receive a letter that you can present later to the IRS. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to hand this over to Dr. Steve Sussman, who is going to moderate and introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Luis. Luis, can you close out that website? There we go. And I'll reclaim the host. Well, terrific. Thank you, Luis, for the introduction of the center. We're very fortunate to have two experts tonight to talk about the election, about the midterm elections. So I want to give, in deference to the time, I want to give rather short introductions. And that's very difficult because both of these scholars have many years of scholarship behind them, and so I'll do the best I can.
I'm a professor and your colleague at Barry, and we can go.
There you go. Okay, so, well, Sean, I'll do you first since you spoke up. Dr. Sean Forman is a professor of political science and the chair of the Department of History and Political Science at Barry University in Miami. He received his MA in International Studies from FIU, and in 2003, he earned his doctoral degree in political science from FIU. Dr. Forman has taught American government, state and local government, public policy, American political parties and elections, Congress, the presidency, and political theory, almost all the courses that are taught within political science departments. Over his many years at Barry, he served as advisor to the College Democrats and the college Republicans, and is founder and co-chair of the campus-wide Interdepartmental Campus Democracy Project. Dr. Foreman was the 2012 recipient of Florida Campus Compact's Graham Fry Civic Award.
Oh, at this point, I think we need to just, oh, yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Sean. And Dr. Foreman is quoted in publications around the world and has been interviewed on numerous radio and television stations, and has written and edited 7 books as well. Actually, on my way down to Miami, I turn on the radio. I often hear him being interviewed in the morning. So that's Sean. Let me do Martin. I'll try to be the impossibly brief.
I'm sorry I interrupted, and especially when Terry Fine was woohooing the Graham Frey.
She runs the program at UCF. I knew she would enjoy that.
Sure.
So Dr. Martin Sweet teaches political science at Purdue and is the CEO and founder of Citizen Congress, a bipartisan technology and civic education firm. He earned his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a JD from the University of Minnesota Law School. Professor Sweet has previously been on the faculty staff or a visiting scholar at Georgetown, Northwestern, FAU, and University of Haifa. I think we both share that position as well at University of Haifa. His book, Merely Judgment, Ignoring, Evading, and Trumping the Supreme Court, published by the University of Virginia Press in 2010, examines the cases of affirmative action, hate speech, flag burning, school prayer, and legislative vetoes. Dr. Sweet was the 2005 co-winner of the American Political Science Association's Corwin Prize for the best doctoral dissertation in the area of public law. Dr. Sweet has been interviewed for his political analysis and insight numerous times, and I get to see them. We're Facebook friends, so he's interviewed now regularly and posts them on Facebook, so thank you. And he's been interviewed by The Hill, Miami Herald, the Palm Beach Post, the South Florida Sun Sentinel, the Orlando Sentinel, and the LA Times, New York Times, and so on and so on. He also has been an invited speaker and panel moderator for national and local educational, civic, political, and religious organizations. When Martin lived in Palm Beach County, he was the go-to guy for the media on all things political, just like Sean is in Miami. They have a lot in common, and that's one thing in common. They were the go-to people within their various regions. We are honored to have both of these distinguished scholars on the same panel. Personally, I not only consider them colleagues, but I also consider them friends. So with that, as I turn this over to you two, I just want to make just a short comment. And I don't want to take away from your glory that you guys are the experts, but when I look at the midterms, I look at it in terms of the expected outcomes. Did we expect to, we didn't see that red wave. Was there a Trump effect? Those sorts of questions come into my mind. What were the issues that the voters who were Republicans versus the voters who were Democrats? What were the different issues? There's so many questions. We can talk for hours about these sorts of things, what interested the voters, and so on and so forth. So with that, we decided with almost a flip of a coin that Sean would go first. So I want to turn it over to Sean for your comments, and then Martin. You are up, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Dr. Sussman, welcome everyone. Could you give me host privileges to
yes,
share screen? I just only to put up my talking points so that we can at least have something to guide us. And then I have other slides that we may or may not get to. I'm happy to be the opening act for Martin Sweet.
Okay.
But no, in all seriousness, we want to hear, some talking points, I think, from both of us, or, big picture, and then hear your questions and go from there.
Martin or Sean, can I say one other thing
Of
quickly
course.
before you get started? Sean and Martin will speak for about 10 to 12 minutes each, and then we will turn it over to all of you for your questions. You can post your questions in the chat box if you'd like. You can also use that little hand up emoji if you want when we get to the question and answer period. So with that, Sean, you're up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and everyone. Can you see my screen? It
Yes.
has this. All right. So again, this is just to give us something to look at and think about as we have many experts on this call. And so here's my take on the 2022 midterm elections. Again, we'll get questions later on. So in my view, it was like a tale of two elections. That here we are in Florida where we were ruby red. Republicans swept top and bottom of the ticket. Governor won re-election by about 20 points, which is unheard of in Florida. So living in that bubble, I was buying into that might be the wave that we would see elsewhere. Republicans did make some gains in New York. They won a couple of House seats, knocked off a Democratic House leader, Sean Maloney. At one point it was even looking like competitive governor's race. It ended up being fairly close, but what was going on here? New Hampshire Senate race at one point, we're thinking it could flip. Part of the story, of course, was Republicans didn't have the best candidates in some places, but the other part of the story is that it wasn't a Republican wave. It wasn't ruby red elsewhere, like in Florida. Nevada, a Republican did win governor and upset the incumbent there. But at the same time, in Nevada, the senator won re-election. The Democrat won re-election. So Democrats will hold the Senate. All eyes are on Georgia. I don't have Georgia anywhere up here, but it's all Georgia, Georgia, Georgia now. Florida, no longer seen as a battleground state, possibly. That's a whole other topic. The idea was that Pennsylvania would be the new Florida this year, and indeed the Pennsylvania Senate race was one to watch. But again, Democrats won. Fetterman won there. The Democrats.
Shapiro.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Shapiro also.
Yeah, Shapiro, very big, which is under the ticket splitting that we saw, maybe some ticket splitting that Shapiro's win was much bigger than Fetterman, and certainly in Georgia as well. So Democrats are happy they won some key governor seats, as you mentioned, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. They flipped Massachusetts and Maryland, which are blue states, but they win those at the same time as losing Nevada. Again, Democrats will hold the Senate. We've got Georgia to watch, and they've when I switched it, that should be minimized, not maximized. They minimized their losses in the House, which is remarkable. Of course, presidents' parties typically lose a bunch of seats in midterm elections. It would not be uncommon to see, like the shellacking of 2010 when Barack Obama's Democrats lost 63 seats, Clinton's Democrats losing 54 and 94. Trump's party, Republicans losing 40 in 2018. So, many of us thought that Democrats would be somewhere in the 20s. It kept going back and forth over the summer with what was going on, the Roe v. Wade overturning decision and Dobbs, a couple of laws passing that made Democrats optimistic. And so when we get this number here, Democrats are going to gain 1 in the Senate and losing 8 in the House right now, maybe about 10. It's going to be somewhere in there. Biden and Democrats can be happy with that. when I put the screen up, I don't see faces, but again, I'm just gonna go through this and not go through other stuff. But if you have questions or comments, you can chime in and I'll hear you. If I'm not seeing your faces right now. Interestingly, there was ticket splitting in several states where people would vote for Democrat for one candidate and Republican for another. Again, mentioned Pennsylvania. What we mean is, even though the Democrat won in both the governors and Senate races, the Senate race was much closer. In Georgia, the governor of Georgia, Kemp, won an easy re-election over Stacey Abrams compared to the recount, the position they were in 4 years ago. Whereas, again, the Senate race in Georgia is going to a runoff. That's because Georgia and Louisiana have different rules from the other states, and that you have to win 50%. You have to win a majority, 50% plus one in the first round to win outright. This wouldn't happen in Florida, that would have a Senate runoff, but they do in Georgia, just like they had two in January 2021, which again is a whole nother story and a big part. Election deniers largely lost. The Secretary of State candidates in many states fortunately lost those key positions. The governor of Arizona, that race where election denier number one on the ballot, or maybe number one was in Pennsylvania, really got crushed. But the Arizona race will stay Democrat governor, and the role of redistricting has to be discussed moving forward. Republican gains, which will be minimal because of the way the map is in the House right now overall, they did gain a few seats through blatant redistricting plans which were allowed to be upheld by the courts, including in Florida, 3 seats that frankly are the role of redistricting flipped from Democrat to Republican to help with that small margin that Republicans are going to end up winning and having a majority in the House. So to briefly go over these other things so we can hear from Martin and hear your questions. Turnout was higher than 2014, but lower than 2018 in most places and nationally. We could look at all the numbers and see the differences. It depends on states that had key races. Florida's turnout will be, like I put there, higher than 14, but lower than 18, but trending upward, just like nationally. That saw Michael McDonald of the University of Florida and U.S. Elections Project in a webinar with other people the other day. We've probably seen lots of articles about turnout being higher, even amongst young people, 18 to 29-year-olds. It was higher, but that still means like 30% of young people eligible to vote turned out. But we're looking at overall trends of higher turnout, both in midterm and in presidential elections. Oh, again, this could be a whole nother topic, but now elections have consequences. They didn't turn out to be quite the way some people expected, and maybe in many ways where the country will be fortunate to have divided government. That's my opinion. Maybe you don't want divided government, you want it moving one way or the other, but the Republican majority in the House and the Democratic majority in the Senate, and of course, Biden as president. We will see what happens policy-wise. Not high expectations based on history, based on the players. House members might want to do investigations. The good news for Democrats is they'll be able to get judges confirmed in the Senate with the majority as razor thin as it is. Florida will be a different story because in Florida, we are ruby red, super majority Republican in the legislature, second term Governor DeSantis with a lot of political capital and a big agenda. And again, we could talk about more of this later, but what was the role of abortion policy, reproductive rights in the election? It seems to be mixed. It may have helped in the Northeast and Midwest in those races. It may help bring young people out. Didn't seem to make a difference in Florida. It was the main issue that Charlie Crist talked about in his gubernatorial campaign. Although again, that's all another story. Florida Democrats and having Crist as their candidate didn't really enthuse the party. But in Florida, we're going to have more of the same. And actually, this would be a good lead into Martin because this is his area. But I suspect we're going to see, a push for a total ban on abortion in Florida. See how people shake out in the Republican Party, whether they'll go to just reduce from 15 weeks to 10 weeks or 5 weeks, or which might as well go total ban. But it wasn't talked about much in the campaign, but you should expect consequences from the election. Possible removal of more local officials by the governor, because again, he has a lot of political capital now. So I will just say, finally, for now, again, thinking about the future, we are starting to see changes in leadership. As anyone watching this probably knows, that Nancy Pelosi announced yesterday that she would step aside from leadership as expected under the circumstances. And so did Steny Hoyer. And so Democrats will have a new leader, and it looks like it will be Hakeem Jeffries from New York, who will be the first African-American, first Black person to hold a leadership position in Congress. Senate, there was an attempted coup in Senate leadership by Florida Senator Rick Scott, which was unsuccessful. And so Mitch McConnell will remain the leader there. But we'll have other changes in leadership. And of course, new Speaker of the House, which appears that it'll be Kevin McCarthy from California. And that's a whole other story. Leave you with, we will also be looking at the impact of Latino, Latina, Hispanic vote in the election this year. A lot of talk about that, especially in Florida, especially in Miami-Dade County, which went majority Republican for the governor and the senator, and the House races here, which was unusual. Miami-Dade County typically has majority voting for Democrat, even if statewide Republicans may win some of those races, but this time Republicans won everywhere for the most part. I think everywhere in Florida, but certainly in Miami, that was part of it. Agenda, I have nothing to say now. And then here we are already looking at 2024 with Donald Trump's announcement that he's running for president and all the other speculation. The appointment of a special counsel today by the Justice Department. Woo, we have so much going on with or without elections. And so that's my take so far. I want to turn it over to Martin and hear from you all when you have questions.
Okay, so everyone hold their questions. Sean raised a lot of good points, and we'll wait till after Martin's presentation and hear from you all. You're up, Martin.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you all. And Sean, that was perfect. I'm tempted just to kind of say ditto and go from there. I mean, I'm sort of looking at my notes like, yeah. Which is good, because I think this election kind of makes a lot of sense, right? We always think about a midterm election, and what we think in a midterm is that the party in power is going to lose. And so that was what I think poised everyone to start thinking red wave, right? You've got Biden in, plus he's unpopular, you've got high inflation. People start thinking, oh, this is like Carter all over again. So you start going back to 78, right? So you're thinking big numbers. And then historically, the big numbers we've seen, right? Obama in 2010, Dems lose 63 seats. Clinton, the Republican Revolution, right? Republicans get the House for the first time in 94. What is that? 50 some odd seats. Trump picks up, loses 40 in 2018. So I think that was what sort of ginned up all of the sort of frothing at the mouth that the red, tsunami was coming. That was dumb, not because of this vote, but exactly what Sean mentioned. And I think I'll go into a little bit more detail, but on redistricting, right? And so what happens in redistricting is state legislatures draw these lines, and redistricting has largely become an incumbency protection project. And so what happens when you redraw these lines, for the most times, most states are afraid of being hyper aggressive because there's always a thought, well, the other party will get into power and what we do unto them, they'll do unto us. And so there's sort of this detente that is usually hit. But the easy solution is, well, let's just protect incumbents. We'll protect Republican incumbents and Democratic incumbents. That didn't happen in Florida, right? Your governor took a pretty aggressive stance and effectively did redistricting himself. And so that was, I think, what accounts largely for those extra seats that come out of Florida. In New York, you've got a Democratic map that gets thrown out by the courts. And the courts give the Democrats an opportunity to come back and do a new map, and they fail. They don't do it. And so the courts offer what they call a fair map. And Republicans do really well, right? But the other places, Pennsylvania, where Democrats do great, right? You largely had a Democratic map with that in the after 2020 census. Michigan actually wasn't entirely a Democratic map. That was actually sort of mixed. That was one of the places Democrats really overperformed. But if you look back historically on the redistricting first midterm of a president, so we're gonna go back 20 years, 2002, 20 more, 82, 20 more years go to Kennedy, right? In 2002, Bush actually gained seats. And we usually throw all that at 9/11, which certainly absolutely had an effect. But don't underestimate that redistricting had an effect there too. 82, Reagan loses 26 seats, which is not nothing, but it's also not the massive numbers, right? Kennedy only loses 4 seats in 62. And so I think really we should have just tempered expectations that in an election, the first midterm following redistricting, you're likely to see a capped number of seats. It's just going to limit the number of seats that are truly at play. Now, also, you have to think about which seats went. And right, when you redistrict, I mean, so members of Congress tend to look a lot like their district. I don't mean physically, right? But ideologically, they look a lot like their district. And districts don't change that much from election to election. And so what that means is that in an election like this, it's the moderates who are going to get picked off, right? And so what that happens is when the moderates get picked off, parties become more extreme, right? I guess, I mean, the one, I think it has now, the Decision Desk has called it, but Colorado 3 with Boebert is really the only one where you had one of the extremes who was even remotely at issue, right? When you get a midterm, even if you get a wave election, for the most part, you know, your squad and your Freedom Caucus people, they're not going anywhere, right? Only in a primary do they lose. So it's really sort of the moderates. But if you, the trend that we've seen over the last 30 years at least has been polarization, right? We've seen the median House Republican become more conservative, the median House Democrat become more liberal, and that distance between them gets exacerbated each time. And with fewer and fewer seats at play and only the moderates going, we can expect more and more polarization. What happens is the party that gains seats will pick up some moderates, right? And so, you know, people are making a lot of press about that McCarthy's going to be beholden to the Freedom Caucus now, and they're going to hold his feet to the fire. I have no doubt they will try to do so, but McCarthy, I think, literally owes his majority to moderates in Virginia, in New York, Nevada, places that those were not the crazy loonies that won. I don't mean to offend anybody, but it was the sort of middle of the road. I'll get rid of a moderate Democrat, Elaine Luria in Virginia too, and replace her with Kiggins, another moderate Republican. The New York races, kind of moderates against moderates for the most part. So he's going to have to hold his majority, but I actually think he's going to owe some of that to the moderates. That will make it a little more difficult, but listen, he's in the majority. That's what you want to do. You'd rather be in the majority with a more difficult cohort to hold together than you would be in the minority with an easy cohort, right? That's the only way you're going to try to get policy through. let me just quickly talk about what will happen. I think Sean's exactly right on that. You're not going to, and I saw, people on Twitter talking about, oh, Republicans are trying to get tax cuts. Republicans have no agenda that they can put forth, right, with the Democratic Senate or Democratic president. What they can do is say no, right? And they can say no to legislation. And Biden got a few big pieces of legislation through. But for the most part, if you really look at what the Biden administration has done, it's been a lot of administrative agency rulings. It's been executive orders, and that's just going to continue, right? So I actually don't expect to see a big halt to a Democratic agenda. But to the extent that we're talking about big pieces of legislation, those won't go anywhere. What else? Oh, I will also say this. So one of the things we teach in AmGov 101 is what's called the median voter theorem, right? And this has been sort of the basic idea that, in essence, you have Dems on the left, Republicans on the right. All you have to do is figure out, because we're a first past the post electoral system, whoever's going to win that median voter, the guy in the middle, everyone to the left will come with them. If the Democrats get that median voter, if Republicans get that median voter, everyone to the right will come with them. And so you just have to focus in on that median voter. That has largely been how we have taught political science for decades. I don't think it's true. I just don't think that's what we're seeing as part of evidence in actual campaigns. What we're seeing instead, so those are what campaigns are called persuadables, right? And we did see some split ticket voting that does occur, but campaigns are rarely actually doing that labor. And the reason they're not doing that labor is it's highly inefficient, right? In order to get a persuadable, one, you have to identify who they are. And then two, you have to actually persuade them, which typically takes a long time, a lot of investment and resources. And then you have to get them to turn out. Whereas with your own partisans, all you have to do is get them to turn out in the very beginning. And so you can it's much more cost efficient to have your people calling your base voters, forget about the people in the median, and try to gin up turnout. And as long as we don't have mandatory voting in this country, right, there's always this excess vote out there. And the question is, can you turn out new voters? I think Sean got that exactly right on the youth vote. There was a lot of thought that this would be the way in which Democrats would succeed this election. I certainly thought Democrats would be committing malpractice if they weren't targeting young women for registration in light of the Dobbs decision. And they did turn out, looks like, marginally a little bit more. But again, I think Sean got that exactly right. They're stupidly low numbers, right? And I talk to my students about this. If you look at sort of the way in which people vote, the older you get, the more likely you are to vote, right? The more money you have, the more likely you are to vote. The more education you have, the more likely you are to vote, right? And so we have these, essentially, this sort of wonder. People are like, well, why do politicians create these public policies that are geared towards, the landed gentry? Well, they vote, right? And so if you're a young person who, I don't know, snaps or tweets or whatever you do, you're screaming into the ether, but you're not actually getting on there and vote. And so they can get, the youth voter can get ignored by politicians. So I'll leave it there. I have a couple things we could hit in some of the questions, but I think Sean got that really spot on.
Thank you. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Sean. Two serious experts in the field. So I appreciate your insight. We will open it up for questions. I'd like to I have 1,000 questions, but just in general, I'm not sure whether whether either of you hit this directly, but why were and I have my own ideas, but why were didn't the polls show that there was going to be a red wave? Why would the polls be so inaccurate? Anyone can take that.
I'll just jump first on that. I actually don't think they were that bad. And I'll tell you, I think what was really bad and what has been extraordinarily bad is how the media discusses polls. what a poll is, what a poll isn't, right? When you're dealing with samples and you're dealing with populations, right? When you see that number, it's, 48-46, all right? And so people think, oh, well, that person's ahead too. Well, unless you're spending an extraordinary amount of money and have a massive sample, 48-46 is a 2-point race, which means you would have to have less than a 1-point margin of error to actually be confident in that result, right? If you have a 7-point race, right? 50-43, oh, it's over, it's 7 points. If you have a 4-point margin of error, that really is 46. That 50 is somewhere between 46 and 54, and that 43 is somewhere between 39 and 47. And so a 50-43 race that actually is wrong and goes 47-46, if you're actually a statistician, if you're actually a pollster, you're happy, you got it right, right? But we don't talk about polls that way, right? We sort of imagine that these point estimates are somehow the precision that we talk about them, but those are the shorthand terms, and we just rarely talk about what sampling means, what margin of error means, and how this stuff really works. We talk a lot about, you hear a lot about weighting, and that's certainly true, and what your model looks like for a turnout, that matters. But I just think we do an awful job about how we talk about what polling really is and what it means to sample a population.
Thank you, Sean.
I was gonna say, well, first I want to thank Martin for his comments. And second, now I want to say ditto. Because I really do agree, and so I won't repeat everything he said there, but I think they were largely all right this time. They weren't wildly off. And everything he said about the margin of error and about the samples that they're pulling from, the problem is how we talk about them. There is a problem with reaching a representative sample, the right people, I was gonna say, reaching actual voters. I think polling, as an industry, they realize that people do it and they're trying to figure it out. But it wasn't so bad this time. Because we were seeing mixed results. The red wave was there, wasn't there, and the toss-ups in Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, they were, right? Yeah.
Thank you. I know Luis has his hands up, but we have a couple of people in the audience who have questions. So can we go there first, Luis, if that's okay with you? Terry, did you want to ask?
Go for the guests first. The audience is
Yeah,
the most important.
Yeah, I know. You want to ask, or was that just a comment, or did you want to ask the question, Terry?
Oh, no, it was just a comment about the election outcomes at one point, and I didn't want to interrupt speaker.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, she was giving us clarification on that Colorado third.
Right.
Thank
Although
you.
Thank you, Sean.
my sense is that a concession is nice, but doesn't actually have a legal significance, right? And so,
Most of us who were living in Florida in 2000 understand that very
right, when it
well.
comes back, right? I remember that night screaming, like, what? And staying up, and yeah. There was another one that was another race that was also exceptionally close. That Yadira, I'm blanking on her name now, but anyway, but yeah. So we will see. I mean, part of it, we will get more data, right? These races will be called. The ranked choice voting things will work themselves out. I think they declared for Peltola, maybe I have to look, but I don't think they've touched the Senate race. We'll get more, and we'll get precinct level turnout data. We'll get much more information as we go on.
And thank you. We have a question from Amber. Did you want to ask that, Amber, or you just want me to read it for you? So Amber writes, can you explain how the Florida governor took an aggressive stance? How is Florida handling abortion? How is the state of Florida residents responding to these changes, or they don't care?
I think that aggressive part was my comment. So what I meant was the DeSantis redistricting of Florida. What he did was try to make several districts more Republican and take away some seats that had been Democratic. So when you're drawing the lines, and this is another thing I think people just don't ever talk about, right? Or think about what it means is, what is the proper way to draw a district? What is the standard by which a district should be drawn? And you hear people say, well, Florida is 55% Republican and 45% Democratic, so therefore Republicans should get, 11 of 20 seats, and Democrats should get 9 of 20, even though I know there's 30. But anyway, percentage-wise. Well, so how would you do that? Would you draw districts that are 100% Republican and 100% Democratic, right? You could do that, sort of. But what you would happen is you'd get exceptionally far right members and exceptionally far left members if they were so safe, right? Or you could say, well, Republicans are 55, Democrats are 45, so let's draw every district 55-45. Well, then you could get every single seat would be won by Republicans. There really is no a priori standard by which we should draw districts. There's a bunch of factors to consider in how we do it. DeSantis took a chance, and his map and his disregard, frankly, of the rest of the Republican Party and how to draw these districts was actually paid off for him in a way that we have not seen and did not see really around the country. Maryland has a pretty aggressive Democratic redistricting. Other than that, I actually think most of the times they really are trying to protect incumbents. That's usually the default position. So that was what I meant about that aggressiveness, or that he tried to put just more Republicans into some districts and fewer Democrats. The risk, by the way, when that happens is when you do the gerrymander and the redistricting, if you get a wave election coming the other way, it can really come back and crush you, because what you're doing is you essentially try to pack all the Democrats into a few places and leave fewer in the other. But anyway, it can hurt if things go badly. He got pretty lucky, and or I don't know if lucky. He did really well.
Okay, unless you wanted to follow up on that, Sean, I'll go to the next.
I have
person.
some comments. I'm wondering if we should hear Tony's question and.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, let's get the questions out
Okay.
there, and then, so we'll go to Tony, and then Jane. I think that might be Michael, actually, but we'll start with Tony. Go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, thank you. I thought your analysis was very good. My question has to do with, I realize it's hard to establish cause and effect of certain actions, but the actions I am wondering your thoughts about are the Biden student loan forgiveness program, the Biden attempt to reduce the cost of fuel through what he tried to do in Saudi Arabia, and then what he did with the strategic reserves, and then the Trump effort of going around doing all these rallies all over the place. How much of that helped or didn't help, which appeared to be, an election-oriented activity?
Do you want to take that, or do you want to take?
Yeah, here, I
also-
was, I decided I was gonna take notes
Okay.
so I could get
Okay.
everything out there real quick. And only on the aggressive thing, real quick, is I just to interpret, I think, he meant aggressive legally, really pushing the bounds, just like they did in Maryland. So that was the intent. I think in Florida, we think of aggressive because DeSantis is known as being aggressive in his talking and his, facing the media and being called a bully and so on. So anyway, you truly meant in pushing the legal limits with the map, but it's part of a larger strategy as DeSantis is seen as being, a forceful leader, a strong leader in pushing policies through. The student loan thing, I don't know. I'd like to know how it played, because my students talk about it a lot, but they didn't vote as much. And I'm not going to ask them who here voted and who didn't. Even though we talked about registering to vote, we gave them opportunities. So long story short, I do think probably the student loan plan proposal was a net positive for getting some youth turnout. again, that it wasn't overwhelming. It never is. But you add together the student loan discussion, abortion policy, Save Democracy. You might have got some young people out. Of course, the loan program was found unconstitutional, and we'll have to see what happens in the Supreme Court. The oil reserves, I think that's important, but I don't, frankly, in my opinion, think it mattered that voters understood or knew that or took that calculation. They just look at the price. I don't think it's a big issue. What are we gonna do about gas prices? But I just think Republicans used it as a hammer without any detail over it. And what was your third?
Trump's rally.
Yeah, well, he draws a crowd. He did in Miami with Marco Rubio the day, 2 days before the election, but in a different venue than DeSantis. I don't know that Trump. I don't think Trump helped this time. No, despite his record that he called, he didn't help him. Again, Pennsylvania and Georgia, they lost those races in part because of him. I see the question about Pennsylvania, and I see you have an Eagles hat on. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, and I'm still a Steelers fan. True, I'm always a Steelers fan. I'm interested in that Senate race. I'm actually writing a little something on it, and I'm not ready. I don't know what my, I think what my conclusions are. Fetterman, the stroke hurt, and the debate, hurt in many ways and made that race closer than it should have been. Oz was a terrible candidate. If you have a better candidate, maybe that helped. Well, let's go back to Shapiro, won by what, 7 or 9 or something. So you have a Democrat at the top of the ticket carrying it. Maybe that's not winnable for Republicans, even with different candidates. Is my thought on it. I'd like to hear yours. Being there, voting in the race, probably.
I'll just add in real quick. The other thing I think political science that we've gotten wrong quite a bit. We talk about all politics is local, right? And that that a lot of these races really turn on sort of the nuance of what is happening in New Mexico or what's happening in Texas. And it's quite the opposite, right? Really what we've seen is elections have nationalized. And if you look at sort of the issues that people are voting on, you did see for Republicans, right, the economy and inflation and crime. And for Democrats, it was abortion and democracy. And I think, by the way, when they say democracy, what they really mean is Trump, right? I still haven't figured out how it's less democratic for one side to win versus the other side. And I get the whole voter qualification stuff, but it can't be democratic because your side wins and anti-democratic and the other side wins, or an election that goes 51-49 your way or 51-49 the other way. That marginal difference is democracy, right? Under attack. They mean Trump, right? When they say democracy. And so and Trump is, usually when you're the minority party, when you're not in the White House, there is no leader of the party. And it's difficult for opposition here, the majority party here, Democrats, to say, this is what Republicans are. That's always sort of a mushy kind of message. But Trump's prominence within the Republican Party, we'll see if he's able, how long he's able to hold on to that. But his prominence makes it really easy for Democrats to rally. And so I think that was really a huge thing for a lot of voters. And so yes, I think it's candidate quality for sure, but it's candidate quality when they're tied to Trump, right? And really, because typically when we talk about candidate quality, what that usually is a shorthand for is this person is not like the district, right? That's usually what we mean by candidate quality. There are the freaks, I guess, that are out there, and the absolute amateurs. That happens, but I think of those factors that you mentioned, the Trump one was the largest.
And I'll just only add, I agree with that. Again, we agree. When I said the youth vote might have been pushed by the student loans and abortion, and the pro-democracy, Save Democracy, I actually was thinking the same thing. But really, it was an anti-Trump vote that's pushing those people there on that talking. Yes.
We have from David Ginsburg. Hello, David. His question is, don't forget about women, that women vote and abortion, while not in the news, women didn't forget and voted as such. And Republicans didn't talk up immigration and the wall. So comments on that?
There is a question by Nancy. I think you missed too.
Oh, I missed that. Oh, Nancy, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll go
No
to Nancy
problem.
after
After
David.
Ginsburg, after
Yeah,
David.
yes. Sorry, Nancy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the suburban collar vote in Pennsylvania that seems that sort of the Bucks County, what is it? I'm trying to think back to my Philadelphia counties now, but
Montgomery County,
Chester County,
Chester
Bucks.
County. Yeah, I'm from
but-
Philly, as is Michael.
Yeah, but it's sort of that main line area.
Lower Marion.
Lower, yeah, but looks like that largely was Democratic this time.
Yes, yes.
I mean, Pennsylvania got bluer, right? I saw this thing that said, well, Republicans outperformed what they did in 2020 in 350 districts and Democrats only in 60. Well, if Democrats in a midterm are outperforming how the president did, that's huge, right? You would expect a big difference. You'd expect Republicans to do better almost everywhere. And so I do think that comment is largely correct, and that but when you say women, it's not all women, right? There were a lot of women that voted for Republicans. One of the things I've seen that was sort of got a little blow up viralness was that it was single women that really voted for Democrats, that married women still largely voted for Republicans. And that, so then you saw a bunch of Republicans say, hey, gentlemen, put a ring on it, trying to thinking that was really the distinguishing factor. But I do think that's right. So I was surprised how few Republicans talked up Dobbs and abortion. They did kind of minimize it for the most part. Lindsey Graham did offer his 15-week federal ban. Marco signed on with that. Both caught a lot of flack for that. But I was surprised because, listen, if you're a Republican, you've been running against Roe versus Wade for 50 years. And so you won. So why don't you celebrate? And they haven't. I was largely surprised at how much Republicans did minimize that. That is actually counter to my base theory that I was offering up before.
Okay, interesting. Thank you, Martin. Nancy, let's do Nancy's question. Please talk about the Electoral College and why you think it is fair or unfair in terms of election outcomes.
Sean, you want to go on that?
Sean, you want to do that?
Well, of course, we were talking a bit about the midterms now, and
Yeah.
before we get to the Electoral College, maybe we should do a different program on that.
Yeah.
I think if we have more immediate questions, we can look at those.
Yeah, well, good answer. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, I know Luis has.
Oh, here, go ahead, Luis. If it's a question, yes.
No, well, I wanted to throw something out as well, because I think it's sort of not an off the wall question, but something that I talk to my students about fairly often when I'm asked, where do you go to get news that isn't biased? Because the media, years ago, you all may or may not remember, Sean and Martin, but years ago in the 80s, there was a PBS special talking about it was called The 30-Second President, the 30 seconds, and they referred to the three networks as the new political parties. All right. And so do you watch, do you get, if you would come to a meeting like this with, if you watch MSNBC with a different idea than if you watch Fox. So where would you, what do you recommend to your students, aside from read everything and then you're going to get an overview? Is there something that you would recommend those here today who, that they could read aside from our own publications and get an idea of what's out there politically?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you're dealing with for-profit media, that's the gig, right? Is to drive eyeballs and what sells. I mean, if you want to know detailed policy, you can look up the actual bills online, right? But nobody does. You want sort of that quick shorthand. I wish I had a great source for you. It's a pox in everybody's house, really, as far as I can tell.
I don't sell any particular brand, but I read The Economist and I listen to The Economist every morning. And that I find that to be somewhat, a good overview.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I say maybe. I mean, I try to be voracious about hitting everything, and I sort of annoy myself because I feel obligated to listen to messages which I hate. Right? It's painful. Like I won't mention who they are, but they're media people I just hate to listen to. But and frankly, friends and acquaintances of mine who I hate to listen to. But I sort of feel obligated, like I should know what's going on in those circles.
Right.
And so I get why people are, so you sort of self-select, right? It's less painful, it's easier, a little more fun to have your own biases confirmed. But yeah, I mean, I really, I jump around and I get pissed off at everybody and I move.
Yeah, I think as academics, it's a good thing to diversify. I agree. I think we're coming down to we've gone over. I don't see any other questions on.
Well,
the
it's my
chat.
question. If you still
I know, but
allow-
Luis, bear with me for 1 second.
Yeah.
What I want to do is, since Luis brought us into this tonight, I want to hand it back to him for his question, and then he can close us out. Okay, Luis?
Yeah, well, yes, this is my question, okay? Because we heard great political scientist analysis and legal analysis, and Martin is both. And Sean is a political scientist and a well-known analyst. But I'm going to ask you a question because one of the things that struck me about this election is that these were not elections as usual. And for some reason, I think the message, and I think you said it, Martin, that those who handed the victory in the House of Representatives to the Republicans are moderates. We have seen that Kevin McCarthy actually came under attack, right? And he obviously won, but I don't think that the last word has been said yet. So my first question, and I have a couple of questions, is do you think that Kevin McCarthy could move a little bit more to the center and return the Republican Party where it was? Maybe reach compromises with the Biden administration, like for instance, the issue of the mess in the border, which McCarthy said that for him is priority. Can the Biden administration compromise on that? Or we are going to see the same polarization and obstruction and one party against the other, and basically we, the citizens, watching how they fight? That's my first question. The second question, and I know the name Ron DeSantis has been said, and whatever people think about Ron DeSantis, whether people are happy or unhappy, there is something very interesting. Donald Trump suppressed primary elections before 2020. That means all the local Republican committees basically subjected themselves to Donald Trump, if you wish. First was by suppressing primaries, And the second time was at the time of the impeachment. You know, they basically boycotted those Republicans who voted for impeachment. Do you think that with the rise of Ron DeSantis and his overwhelming victory in Florida, there will be an internal fight in the Republican Party or not? Everyone is saying yes, but the question is, you know, Trump's tactics sometimes are very intimidating, you know, and he cannot tolerate competition. And the question is whether there will be an element of democratization, I would say, within the Republican Party. So these are my two questions.
Here, maybe I'll go first on this one, Martin, and you can close us out on our comments. And I was going to briefly say on the media diet, again, I agree with my co-panelist, Martin, on that. There is no one source. I think we really have to look at everything. When I was in college, a professor said to me, you should read the New York Times every day. It was my international relations professor. And it was good for learning about the world and politics. And it was useful, and it's still useful, but the old gray lady ain't what she used to be, you know, and it is all for profit. And truly, I have on my TV screen, I watch the news mix with CNN and MSNBC and Fox and BBC at the same time. I drive my family crazy, but you switch the sound, but I watch who's showing Trump speech, who's showing Biden talk, who's showing this, that, the other most of the time. And I try to read a little bit of each, but I go to like realclearpolitics.com, which is an aggregate site, Safety Review in Florida as an aggregate. So you can pull up what you think is important in doing it. You know, Luis, yeah, again, I'm going to be brief so we can all go have dinner later, but McCarthy to the center. Oh, you know, my younger days, I'd say yes, yes, you know, I'd be hopeful, but no, it ain't happening. It ain't happening. He does those jobs to the moderates like Martin talked about. We'll have to work with the moderates, but are we getting compromises with the Biden administration on immigration reform, on guns? No, right? McCarthy is still kissing the ring of Trump. And he also has to admit, Trump's going to go out there and say, he's speaker because I made him speaker. So he's going to have to deal with that. And to your second question, you're right. Trump suppressed primaries, local Republican parties, you know, disavowed members who voted for impeachment or who weren't loyal enough. So that's all going to be going on. That's not going to get resolved easily. In Florida, you can read about, we have members of the Proud Boys who were elected to the Miami-Dade Republican Party. And, you know, and you have the same people saying, well, they got elected to the position, we can't take them out. So, you know.
And Marco Rubio, who was a strong Trump supporter, won overwhelmingly. Indeed.
And, you know, supported by that wing of the party, or else they would have thrown him overboard in a primary if they felt justified or tried to. So how this ends, I don't know, but it's not going to be well. I wish I could be more hopeful. You know, I think, again, Biden's the wild card here. He's the way he's maneuvered the presidency so far, he has some victories, again, legislatively and electorally. I'm not convinced he's going to run again. That's a whole nother story, but I think we really need to see how stuff plays out. But for now, Donald Trump is the leader of the elected Republican Party, and they have to listen to him or overthrow him. I'm concerned, what are going to be the primaries moving forward? Are they going to have a calendar like we've seen in the past and allow open entry for people to run for the Republican primary in 2024? They already said they're not participating in the debates. I mean, that is official. Republican National Committee said we're not participating in 2024 debates, right? So I don't know, but again, DeSantis has a lot of power in Florida, but DeSantis is aligned with the Trump wing as well in terms of governing and carrying out his ideology in Florida. That's
The
my.
question is whether DeSantis is going to give up and say, I'm allowing Trump to run.
Well, I mean, we're gonna see what happens with Trump legally or not. I mean, that's, I think it's, DeSantis is gonna decide, can I do this or not? You let Trump implode, or we'll see what happens to him. DeSantis just got reelected. He has a legislative session coming up where on abortion, as I said in my opening comments, I think they're gonna go for a total ban on abortion and legislatively in Florida. They're gonna pass more controversial education laws. He's going to keep appointing judges in Florida. He's the king of Florida for the next 2 years for sure. There's no reason to say I'm going to run for president and have Donald Trump call you names and talk about your past life that he might know something about. If you don't need to bring that upon yourself. So I don't think Trump's going to be our next president. I hope he's not the nominee. But in the meantime, he's the leader, and somehow he has to get kicked off of that perch. McCarthy and DeSantis ultimately, they don't, they're following his lead policy-wise.
Martin?
I'll just jump in real quick.
Yeah.
Again, totally right on a lot of. The one thing I would mention though is, particularly for McCarthy, I actually don't think McCarthy is as scared of Trump as he's scared of the Trump voter. And I don't know, we'll see that. I think sort of the magic of Trump, of the I'm going to say something new and rally people in a new way, that may be on the way out. But don't underestimate, Trump actually did have his thumb on the pulse of Republican activists, right? And what he saw was that a real strong split between sort of the Main Street Republican country club, 2012 pre-vision of what the Republican Party was. Trump was actually pretty good on that. I actually think DeSantis also has that same vision of where the party is. I think you've seen Marco try to articulate a similar view, and so there is that big segment of the voting population, in particular the activists that are the primary voters, that I think just can't be forgotten. And there is a lot of fear, not so much as the big boogeyman Trump, but of what those voters represent. And if McCarthy compromises, he's a squish, he's a sellout, he's a traitor, and that's where he gets devastated. And on DeSantis, again, it could be wrong, but if I'm Ron DeSantis, why do you run? You're the most popular governor, of the Republicans in the country. You've got a beautiful setup to govern for 4 years. One way or another, Trump is done. If he wins, he obviously can't run again. If he loses, if he's a third-time loser now or fourth, whatever, depends count midterms, he's got to be done, right? So if you're on DeSantis, I think all the incentive structure to DeSantis says, let that guy just go. I'll sit here and wait. What's got to be gnawing at the back of his mind, though, is, am I the Chris Christie of 2012? Am I the Scott Walker of 2016, when maybe I had a shot, or maybe I have 4 years off in those. Anyway, but when a governor was super popular, everyone thought, oh, this is going to be the guy. And then they didn't quite seize the moment. And so that's got to be, that's the calculus for DeSantis of, do I wait this guy out, or is my flame going to be gone by that time? So we shall see, but yeah, but I got, Sean, I mean, you were right, Steve, that you get along with me, actually have very, very similar views on where this stuff is.
Terrific. I'm going to turn this over to Luis to close us out, but I just wanted to say to Sean and Martin, thank you so much personally for coming. You guys have been colleagues for many years and friends, and I appreciate your intellect. And Sean and I work together at Barry, so I see how his reputation is top flight at the university, and we're just honored to have you here today, and Martin as well. I will turn this back to Luis to close us out.
Yes.
Luis?
Okay. Well, I can only say ditto to you, Steve. The two speakers were terrific, and I think they enlightened us. Thank you so much. I want to actually thank the audience. I mean, what would we do without our audience? I really want to thank you for being here. I see people who come all the time here, all the time new faces, and let's keep growing together. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much to the speakers. And good night. You will hear from us in probably about 2 weeks. We will have another program. Stay tuned.
And to those,
Good luck, everybody.
bye-bye, everyone. Bye. Shabbat shalom to those who
Thank
celebrate.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.